So, if you're just joining us, we're in chapter 4 of moving through the story and looking at God's story in the Bible from the beginning to the end. And we're talking about basically the Exodus story today. And as we're looking at this, just don't forget how the setup for all of this. So before we even get to our key passage for today, I want to remind you how Pharaoh became so fabulously wealthy and ultimately powerful. This is from earlier in the story. So Joseph bought all the land in Egypt for Pharaoh. The Egyptians, one and all, sold their fields because the famine was too severe for them. The land became Pharaoh's, and Joseph reduced the people to servitude from one end of Egypt to the other. However, he did not buy the land of the priests because they received a regular allotment from Pharaoh and had food enough from the allotment Pharaoh gave them. This is why they did not sell their land. Joseph said to the people, "Now that I have bought you and your land today for Pharaoh, here's seed so you can plant the ground. But when the crops comes in, give a fifth of it to Pharaoh. The other 4/5 you may keep as seed for the fields and food for yourselves and your households and your children." "You have saved our lives," they said. "May we find favor in the eyes of our Lord. We will be in bondage to Pharaoh." So Joseph established it as a law concerning land in Egypt, still in force today, that a fifth of the produce belongs to Pharaoh. It was only the land of the priests that did not become Pharaoh's. So Joseph was the one that God used to elevate Pharaoh to the point where he was what the world would think was a worthy adversary for God. Now, in reality, it was no contest. But let me go ahead and focus in on Exodus chapter 17 for today. It's hard talking about these wide swaths of story. Any single part is worthy of a sermon by itself. We get the spectacular demonstration of power through the plagues. We get the mighty story of the Red Sea and the destruction of Pharaoh's army, the wandering through the wilderness. But this just seemed like the part that we most needed to talk about. So this is from chapter 17. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why'd you bring us up out of Egypt?" I'm whining. I don't know how grumbling was. "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" And then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord answered Moses, "Walk on ahead of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." And so Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" Well, we've already, just in our brief journey so far, we've already seen God's tendency to use the unlikeliest of characters as his chosen people. We've already marveled at the reminder that it's never too late to start your mission for God. The reminders that God's always at work, even if it seems like he's not, even if it feels like he's abandoned us. And all of those themes and concepts come together in this part of the story. So Abraham and Sarah struggled through 25 years of waiting for the promised child to be delivered. But just imagine 400 years of slavery. I imagine, we don't know for a fact, I imagine that the parents told their children over and over, God made promises to Abraham. We're going to be a great nation. We're going to receive God's blessing, and we're going to be God's blessing. They may have told stories of Joseph's adventures and how God worked through him to not only deliver much of the ancient world from starving to death, but saved his family, the people of Israel. Maybe they remembered God telling Abraham that eventually he would deliver his people from slavery and punish their oppressors. Genesis 15, then the Lord said to him, to Abraham, know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. And so that's something to hold on to. That's a promise, but year after year, generation after generation, I just can't help but wonder if they started thinking, maybe that's just a story. Maybe there isn't anything to hold on for. And I'll give these people every break in the world for being downhearted, because 400 years, and that's a hard life. That's a terrible life. Maybe they were thinking God had forgotten about them. I don't know. But as you know, God did come through. He did remember. He had this all lined up. He showed everyone his power. He thoroughly humbled a king who thought himself a god. He set his people free. And that's at the point where I don't want to give them any more breaks. Because, just for context. So, these are people who are all there, eyewitnesses, lived through all the plagues. I mean, take your pick. Any one of those, I'd be like, okay, this God's for real. We can count on a God with that kind of power. No, they get this just a laundry list of all these incredible things. And then, I mean, really, how long would you have to be led through the wilderness by a pillar of fire to be like, I'm pretty sure God's with me? You following me here? And then they get that. Then they get the Red Sea and watching it swallow up all of Pharaoh's army. And you'd think the rest of their lives they would never blink, right? Do you know what we just saw? Do you know what we just experienced? And yet, somehow, these people, they start wondering. And it seemed like almost as soon as they get into the wilderness, as soon as they are free people, they use that freedom to question God's presence. And lest we be too judgmental, you think we ever do that? You think we ever make the same mistake? Sometimes I'm reading the story of Israel in the wilderness and I'm thinking, this is the story of humanity. Okay, so I'm not the only one who thought that. Sometimes I'm like, is this about Israel or is this a church? Not this church, but I've been to churches that sounded just like that. Grumbled about everything. It was always the leader's fault. Yeah, that too. I just wonder. They had the benefit of living through these things, but think of what, the benefits we have. We get to read every one of these stories and then keep going. I mean, seriously, they had this much and we had this much added on. And then our own lives and our own experiences and watching God work in mighty ways in our congregation, in our lives. And sometimes we're still like, I'm just not sure God's paying attention. I don't know if God's remembering what we talked about. We do this too. And we overlook the miracles that he just showers upon us. Maybe we get to taking things for granted, simple things like not wondering when our next meal is going to come, or being healthy, or having friends, or being able to have the freedom to go to church and not worrying about being arrested. We miss all those things, and then if there's just even a hiccup, a little hardship, we start thinking, God, are you still paying attention? The real miracle, I guess, is that God does stick with us all day, every day. But hard times are a test of sorts, but they do have the potential to help us grow. But really the key to struggle, the key to hardship is that it exposes us. We talked in Sunday school about, sports teams. A team that's in a hard position, like the University of Virginia. When they're in a tough position, they either come through or they crumble. It's a tradition at Virginia to always crumble in the clutch. That's what they do. In football. They do. Washington Redskins, yeah. It's tradition. I have a bag of those Washington Redskins chips. Have you seen those in the store? Every season they're like, Redskins, awesome. Those chips look great, but they fall apart. Now you can't. They just crumble every time you try. Might be a coincidence. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. Hard times expose our bad spots, our weak spots, right? They can help us. Now, that can be good in terms of exposing things we need to work on, but what we see over and over, and I just read one example for you, over and over, we see a little hardship coming, and the Israelites would just show signs of this incredibly weak faith. I mean, just weak. When I think of some of our folks who have experienced just incredible tragedy just in the recent history, and how they have just shown the power of faith and the power of God's presence in their lives. But we also can think of people who had something, terrible happen and just decided, oh, God's not even real. I can't trust, and turn away. It can go either way. So we want to learn from the successes and failures of biblical characters so that we can, make the best of our time. So what we get is, and again, it's just like over and over this happens, but this is a great example. The people get discontent, they get anxious, they start taking it out on their leader. In this case, there's only one. Later on, there might have been more. And it's normal to kind of lash out when we're anxious, when we're under stress. We're more likely to yell at people or, get angry at our kids, even though it might not be anything necessarily their fault. But they freaked out over everything. And Moses, I'm telling you, he might have thought he was not qualified, but he stayed pretty cool. A lot of people, when they get kind of attacked like this, might have responded, much more aggressively. But he's like, why are we having this conversation? Why are you testing God? And so he didn't take it personally, which is often easy to do. But he went to God and he's like, God, we need to talk about this. What am I to do with these people? He wasn't questioning God. He knew God had it. But he's like, what am I going to do with these people? He was an exemplary leader. And see, leaders are often constrained in what they can and can't do because of the position. As an example, when I'm teaching classes, I'll have students that what I really want to tell them is, you are wasting your money. Go learn to do something productive. You're not ever going to have a college degree. I can't say that. I have to say, you struggled a little bit with your writing on this assignment. Yeah, I have to be tactful because that's my position. You follow? And you've been in positions where you wanted to shake somebody by the lapels, but you had to say, we need to discuss, So sometimes there has to be someone that's in a different role to really speak the truth. And that I can think of times when, in a deacon's meeting, sometimes in a business meeting, where something was happening, and because of the pastoral role, because you have to be so careful about, taking sides or having an agenda or all these things that set people off, and what I found myself praying for was somebody needs to stand up and speak the truth. And in those cases, it couldn't be me. What we decided during Sunday school was that what the Israelites needed was Michelle. If Michelle had been there, so it might have gone something like this. And this is both serious, and you can picture Michelle doing this. They needed somebody. Moses was like, just don't test God. I'm going to go pray over this, and what a leader has to do, and someone in the group needed to turn around and say, are you guys kidding? Are you kidding me? See, you can see her doing it, can't you? Was anybody else here present when the Nile River turned to blood? Did anybody else see that? Did you see the frogs? Did you see the hail? Were you there the day it was dark? Right? Let's see a few hands. How many of you remember thinking we were going to die and the water opened up and we walked through? Does anybody remember that? Were you there? Because I remember that. And then we thought, oh, they're going to chase us through, and whew, they're gone. Was anybody else there? Are you crazy? Are you out of your minds? You think God did that and can't provide some water for us? That's what somebody needed to say, right? And Michelle's like, totally would have done it. And she, of course, ending with, God bless your little hearts. But here, they are saying, is the Lord among us or not? And somebody needed to say, did God deliver us or not? They asked the wrong question because their hearts were not in the right place. They were missing the whole point of all that stuff. That was faith-building stuff. They should have been at this point where they're just like, we don't see any water. We're about to die. God's got it. Because God had delivered them over and over. Has God delivered us or not? And notice, Moses doesn't blame God. He doesn't question God. He's just like, what about these people? He wasn't shaken. He had learned. He's not concerned about God's love or power or presence. He's worried about those people. And, I know this is hard. It's easy to say, hard to do. But we should not ever spend any energy, ever, wondering whether God's with us. We got plenty of things that need our energy. That is not one of them. Our concern really should be, trying to help people, ourselves included, trying to make sure that when we are uncomfortable, when we are unsettled, when we're struggling, that we don't make sinful, faith-damaging choices and let those thoughts get into our heads. We should always be refocusing on what God has done to prove we've got nothing to worry about. Has God delivered us or not? Not is God with us or not. And so I think looking at the story of this journey, we should be changed by God's deliverance. We should be transformed by what we experience. Every time that God comes through for us, that should build us up. We should be new and better after that. We should be closer to God, stronger in our faith, and more like Jesus as we go. And think how many times, again, we should count all the biblical things, but just take that off the table. Just think about all the ways God has come through for you in your life that you've seen with your own eyes. Has God delivered us or not? And if we're really focusing on those things, we will be pushing ourselves to show more love and gratitude in response. We will face everything with confidence and faith and wanting to be more open to God's movement and transforming power and more open to his will and his way, more obedient. See, God's presence, God's activity, it changes people. And here, I haven't done this in a long time, but I am going to step onto my little invisible soapbox for a moment. I fear that in the church, not necessarily here, just in any church, anywhere, there's no longer like this expectation that we are going to grow and become different. Has anybody else here, I've known several of these, people who were somewhere between really annoying and just plain awful, and everybody would say, it's just how he is. She's always been like that. You ever heard that? I know, I'm pretty sure she's dead now, so I can tell you. Her name's Myrtle. And Myrtle...
That's my aunt.
Aunt Myrtle, she was so difficult to be around. She joined the WMU, and by the time I arrived as her pastor, there were only 2 people who could even bear to show up because she made it so miserable. I got to start a Bible study and watch her kill it because nobody wanted to be in the room with her. And people would say, she's just like that. That's Myrtle. It's just Myrtle. You see what I'm getting at? And I've seen that played out, in various versions and degrees. But why is it that we can go to church and worship a God of transformation and just think, well, just because she's been exactly the same awful person for 40 years, what's to worry about? I think that's something to worry about. And I'm not saying you should start being like, I need to talk to you. No. We are commissioned to grow together. And this is, I'm treading on thin ice here. If you're seeing someone, and again, we're all pretty good, but people in other churches. If you're seeing somebody that you're just like, you've had that same bad attitude, or you've been, same church, different woman, everybody knew she was the town gossip, the worst gossip anybody knew, and nobody thought, that's wrong. I should just say, Diane, have you ever considered? No, it was a different one. Long ago and far away, folks. That was who it was, though. Have you ever, it makes me uncomfortable. The Bible talks about gossip. You see what I'm saying? And instead, people just be like, everything's fine. It's okay. That's just how she is. That's like, she's basically, spiritually, walking out in the street, and you're seeing the truck coming, and you're just going to be like, well, she's just a middle of the street kind of girl. I think a little bit of warning seems fair. Kind. You're likely to get the shoot the messenger thing, but, is it worth it to just kind of give somebody a little warning when you see them heading down the wrong path? I don't know. I just felt like I needed to get that out there. Sometimes we lose sight of the fact that God changes people. And we start being okay ourselves with just being who we've been. And we should always be changing. And if you know that you've been exactly the same for 20 years, worry about that. And if you know somebody who's just seemed the same all along, worry about them. We should worry about each other a little bit. Because it's our job to grow together and pursue Jesus. And if we're not changing, if we're not becoming somewhat different, something's not working. And that's why they were in the desert for so long. They had seen mind-blowing things. And they get to the Jordan River and God says, go claim what I promised you. And they're like, I don't know. That's why they had to go back. Do you want to wander in the desert for 40 years? Or do you want to claim promises? Okay. I'm reeling myself back in. When Paul was writing to the Corinthians, he had a really important thought on all of this. Of course, this was part of what makes Jewish culture. And he said, listen, don't forget, everybody went on the same journey, but not everybody found the same result. Everybody experienced the same things, but not everyone got to where they needed to go. Everybody was part of God's deliverance and miracles and provision, but he wasn't pleased with all of them. And boy, Paul was on. He's generally pretty on this. All these people had exactly the same experiences. Some of them developed humility and gratitude and faith. Some of them, woke up every morning and thought, I just can't believe that God feeds me by a miracle every morning. And other people are walking out there going, manna doesn't make very good fajitas. This is boring. We already had this yesterday. Does anybody know how to make manna gumbo? God provides water, and some of them are like, about time, and some of them are like, water came out of a rock! Did you see that? I'm writing this down. I'm going to tell my kids about this. And they'll say, there goes Dad again. You see, some people, no matter how much God delivered, they kept thinking of themselves and their comfort. They didn't grow more confident, they grew more demanding. Instead of growing in faith, they grew in discontent. I mean, they journeyed with God and weren't changed by it. And they died in the desert. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, perform many miracles? And I will say to them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. It's a really uncomfortable story. So, just like anything else we study in the Bible, I think it's important for us to look at this and do some serious self-assessment. And just think, where am I in this story? Which characters do I fit in with? Am I sometimes part of that crowd? Or am I one of the ones that's turning around going, are you kidding? All of our lives are different, but we're all on the same journey. And we want to be changed. That's how it's supposed to work. So you want to think about those hardships. Have they made you stronger and better, or have they exposed weaknesses? You need to think about that. I don't want Jesus to be looking upon us and saying, what am I going to do with these people? That is the last thing I don't want coming out of his mouth. So when we are facing anything, business meeting, personal, prayer issue, challenge, whatever, we need to all go back to, has the Lord delivered us or not? Then we've got our answer. We're going to have our time of commitment now. We're going to stand and sing hymn number 591. If God's been working on you in some way, convicting you of something, I hope you'll feel free to share that with me. I'll be down here in the front. Let's stand and sing hymn 591. guys are so indulgent with me. Thanks for letting me get things off my chest some days. I appreciate that. But listen, you take the story of today, that whole story of deliverance. I mean, it is a laundry list of reasons to never doubt the power and love of our God. And it just keeps adding on after that. So let's act like people who have every reason to believe. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.